Hey, Sarah.
Hi, Megan.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I mean, this is one of the best parts of my week is recording our
Oh,
podcast.
me too. I look forward to it.
I do too. I love
Yeah.
it so much. I
Yeah.
have a big topic for my check-in today.
Oh, yeah, let's hear it.
Well, I sent it to you earlier this week. So, a bunch of my girlfriends had been sending me through social media this Lululemon chemical outbreak research that's been going around right now. So, it was reported last week on CBS News that Lululemon leggings are full of chemicals. And then it kind of starts spiraling on social media, which was what I sent you. So there's like TikTokers standing in front of Lululemon sharing these findings and banning the brand. And this was just shocking to me because I wear Lululemon leggings every single day of my life.
Oh, no, I do too. I have so many pairs of the Align
I
leggings from
know.
Lululemon. That's like my staple pant.
They're the best. They're
They
they're the
are.
they're the
They're so
best.
soft. I know.
Yes, and they're perfect for running. They stay put and they make
Yep.
your butt look cute.
Yeah, and they don't squeeze in on your waist. They just sit
Yes,
there and they don't do anything. I
I
know.
know. They're the
Oh
best.
no.
But
This
I'm
is such
so,
bad news.
it's such bad news. But I'm so happy to have someone like you in my life because you know how to find the research and find the accurate information when things like this are put out there. So we dove in a little bit. You sent me some
Yeah.
great reports, and we did a lot of research. And what we found is that, unfortunately, yes, women's leggings from multiple brands, as well as sports bras, raincoats, school uniforms, which our girls are wearing, they have been tested positive for PFAS, which are also known as forever chemicals. So, products that are flexible, water resistant, sweat wicking, and breathable are using these chemicals in production. And the findings have shown that our body is basically absorbing these chemicals. But what was interesting in an article you sent me was that actually our highest risk for absorption of these chemicals is in our drinking water.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too. I had no idea about that.
No idea.
Sort of
So
scary.
it's really scary. So the
Hmm.
good news on that is that in March, the Environmental Protection Agency proposed their first national standard for PFAS levels in drinking water. So it's not enacted yet. It's not passed
Oh,
yet. It's just
okay.
been proposed. But
Okay.
hopefully, with this knowledge out there now, that will push it to be passed. But nothing has been proposed for clothing yet.
Hmm.
So, how much risk there is in these PFAS is not totally clear. But what we do know from other research is that toxic chemical buildup in the body is, in fact, linked to cancer and thyroid disease.
Mm-hmm.
And then you were able to find an additional study to support these findings, and they took 32 pairs of leggings from different brands to be tested. And this study was overseen by Dr. Pete Myers, who's the chief scientist at the Environmental Health Services, and he's also a professor of chemistry at Carnegie. So, this is a valuable study. Many of the leggings did test positive, but some tested negative. They had no PFAS chemicals.
Yeah.
So, because some of them tested negative, we know now that it's not essential to produce this product with
Mm-hmm.
this chemical. So, hopefully, they'll be phased out completely.
Yeah. I hope so. The question is like what to do with all the leggings that we have.
Okay,
And do
so
we continue to wear them or not?
uh,
Um, I
I
know
know.
it's a big dilemma for me because now I'm looking at them thinking, well, I don't want to wear this if it increases my risk. I mean, no one wants to increase their risk of this sort of stuff.
No. So the ones that were found that are high in the PFAS are the Lululemon line. Also, ones from Athleta, LuLaRoe, Old Navy, and Vuori. The ones that had no chemicals detected, Aloe, Fabletics, Nike, and Sweaty Betty. And then these PFAS were detected mostly in the crotch. So I think that the health advice here would be to wear underwear. The fashion advice can be to wear thong underwear because you don't want granny panty lines on your leggings.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I just deal with granny panty lines. I don't know. I wear some. I wear normal underwears with my leggings, but
No.
yeah, I know. Well, I don't think you can see mine, but I have like the lace, so you don't have like an indentation. I
Oh.
can't stand the indent.
I'm going to check next time I see you.
I know, check my panty lines. I always wear undies with them, but yeah, good advice. And thanks, corporate America, for putting all the PFAS in the crotch area.
I know, right?
In what world? It's always like the worst. Like I wouldn't think that would be where you'd need to put it all, but that's just not ideal.
It's disgusting.
It's not. Yeah, it's gross.
It's so gross. So I think I'm going to make sure that I'm always wearing underwear with my leggings. And I think I am going to try. I haven't tried Sweaty Betty, but I think I'm going to try those. I do have a lot of Nike leggings I love. I haven't loved the Aloe ones, but maybe I'll try again.
I did just buy a couple pair of Aloe recently.
Oh, do you like that?
Before this even came out, because they just had their 30% off sale. I'm pretty sure it's over now.
Okay.
So I just tried a couple pair, and yeah, I do like them. They're not as like, you know how the Aligns just sort of like lay on your body.
Yeah.
They're not exactly like that. They like the waist is a little bit too big, and they fall down a little bit, but they're really cute. So
Okay.
you know, I'd rather switch and be safe than wear all my old Aligns. I don't know. I'll have to think more about it. It's new news, so I'll just absorb it and think about it. But
well, and I think also that more studies will come out, because once this is put out there, I'm sure that corporate Lululemon is scrambling right now. So I think let's stay on top of this topic. I'm going to.
Agreed.
I'm probably going to still wear mine. I'm going to wear underwear with them, and I'm just going to stay on top of the topic, but I'm not going to buy anymore. I'm going to check out some of these other brands.
Agreed. Yeah, I'll try out Sweaty Betty too. I think that I've liked some of their things online. I've never tried them before, but they do get good reviews. I think that'd be a good place to look. And I agree, Nike is great for running pants.
Oh, I love
when it's
Nike.
cold outside.
Yes, I love their
some good
pants. I think I tend to go to Lululemon just because it's easy and they have different materials and colors, but I do love Nike's running pants.
Yeah, we like a challenge, so we'll do more investigation. As we find some leggings from other places we like, we should just report.
Let's do it. I love it. We do love a challenge. Let's find a legging that is better than the Lululemon Aligns. That's
a big challenge. We can do it.
I love it. Well, thanks for helping me dig into this topic, because this is an important one. But I was so appreciative to have your articles coming through with all the research on this.
Yeah, no, of course. You read more into that than I did, so you definitely. I'm glad you took this and ran with it, because I'm glad to hear all of this and talk about it. The one article that I thought was really good, but didn't. I wasn't quite sure if it was legit or not, was from Momavation, and it is legit. So when you look it up and look up the leggings with PFAS, look up Momavation, read that article. It does have some like ads in it and stuff like that, but worth it just to read it, because they do go through the list of 32 that they found PFAS in the leggings and didn't find. And so you can look at that list and see if you have any of those in your closet. Just to be knowledgeable.
and chances are you do.
I
have an entire drawer that is rolled up Align Lululemon. I mean, I must have 20 pairs.
I know, I do too. I probably should throw some of them out, honestly, that they get so filled up, but they are so comfy.
I know.
Well,
how are you
thanks
doing?
For digging in.
Yeah,
I'm good. I actually have some interesting news coming off of the Disney trip that we just took.
Oh.
So, first of all, we saw Phantasmic, not Fantasia. So on our last episode, we called the performance we saw at night, the Nighttime Spectacular. We called it Fantasia the whole time because it's based on Fantasia. So our bad. It's actually Phantasmic. And Phantasmic.
I didn't even notice.
I know. I think like Disney fiends would get on our backs about that. So yes, sorry about that. And we saw Phantasmic when we were there, and for me, one of the most spectacular, moving, amazing moments was that huge, maleficent dragon coming out and the fire and all of that. So a couple of weeks ago at this point now, that dragon burned up. It caught fire during a Phantasmic performance. And you could really see just the whole dragon sort of catching fire. And it was really lucky that it wasn't worse than it was, because that dragon's hooked up to all kinds of gas lines and things like that to make that fire come out. So it could have been an even bigger explosion than it actually occurred. But the whole dragon just basically caught fire. And that dragon's already really scary.
God.
I know.
Was it like while it was breathing fire, some of the flames caught the actual structure?
Yeah, and if you look closely, you can actually see liquid falling from her mouth. And I feel like there was something there that was leaking that caught fire, and then her body caught fire. And 6 people were injured who were on the Tom Sawyer Islands because of smoke inhalation. And on some of the videos, you can look and see Mickey see this occur, and he just goes he nods his head one time, and they take him down, and they evacuated Mickey quickly. They got everybody off the island as fast as they could, and they evacuated the park.
Was that his like sign, like get me out of here, nod my head?
Get me out of here. Yeah, I think he must have been signaling to somebody, "I'm ready, take me out."
Who were the 6 people that were injured? Was he one of them?
I think that they were staff.
Employees.
So employees, yeah. Some of the employees got, just from smoke inhalation, I think they had to be treated because of the exposure. So it's sad because this dragon is very, very special. She is called Murphy for the term Murphy's Law. And this is a law that says anything that can go bad, will go bad.
Oh, no.
this dragon's had a lot of problems in the past. She has frozen up before and unable to move. I was reading for this check-in, and people called her an obstinate toddler at times. She's just a very difficult dragon, but very, very sentimental. And between all of the parks, it's like universally agreed that she was the best Maleficent dragon that Disney had. She's the biggest, she's the scariest, she's the most amazing. So it's really sad for people that love Disney to see this iconic dragon burn. But one thing that they did, this happened actually at Disney World a couple years ago with the Maleficent dragon that is in the parade. So she also caught fire during the parade. You could see her fire going. I know it's a crazy video. And I remember this happening. I remember looking at this being like, what in the world? And they had to evacuate Disney World Main Street because that's where the parade was occurring. But what they did for her is they just removed all of the outside of her, and now she's a skeleton dragon. So you can you see through her for sure, and you see her bones basically of like the metal that holds her together, and it's like a mesh looking dragon that I don't think can catch fire anymore. That's my impression. So I'm wondering if they can do something like that with this dragon, if she's salvageable, to maybe just like remove the leather that's like on the outside that seems to catch fire.
Oh, sure. So is the show canceled for now?
I think that they are continuing to do the show, but just without her, which is sad. But
it is. Although my daughter really did not like that part of the show. I had to cover her eyes. I loved it. It was just so big and impactful, but it is scary.
She was terrifying and
Yes.
amazing. Our 3-year-old woke up in the middle of that
Oh,
dragon,
yeah.
and she just looked up with her mouth wide open and her eyes like, oh my. She just couldn't believe what she was looking at. It was sort
I
of
know.
funny. Yeah,
Oh,
but
wow.
surprising,
Wow.
right? And like, what an amazing thing that you and I got to see it right before this happened, and now
Yes.
she's gone. And amazing part
Wow.
of like magic and history is maybe gone. So
Oh,
we'll see
that's
what they do with
crazy.
that. I know. I hope that they are able to fix her up to the best that they can, or replace her with something that works a little better. That's not an obstinate toddler that's named
Yeah.
Murphy.
Yeah.
We'll see. They did suspend pyrotechnics
Oh,
across
good.
all Disney parks after this happened, because I think this is now like the second time this has been a big deal where the dragons caught fire, and so they're not doing this. Even like
Yes.
in Tokyo and stuff right now, they've shut this down. So
Oh, good. Yeah, it needs some
drag.
time to regroup on this.
Yeah,
Well,
they
thank
just
goodness nobody was seriously hurt. I
I
mean,
know.
what a
It could have
scary
been
thing to
worse.
happen.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, I'm glad it didn't
So
happen
it's
while we were
scary for
there.
kids.
That would
I
have been really
know.
scary.
I know. Just booking it out of there, I'm sure. But yeah, so crazy
Wow.
times. But that's
So interesting.
yeah.
Well, welcome everyone to Platinum Perspective. This is the podcast about beauty, travel, luxury, and more. I'm your co-host, Sarah.
And I'm Megan. Sarah and I are best friends who put the work in to get the most out of life so you don't have to.
So, ever wonder how amazing it would be to have your best friend be a psychologist? Well, I have been so excited ever since I met you, Megan, learning about your
Aw.
education and work. Of course, my favorite thing about you is that you are really, really, really good looking. No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you, Sarah.
It's that you are so smart. You're just
Aw.
brilliant.
Thank you.
And I love having you psychoanalyze everything. It's
I
so
do,
fun.
I know. It's part of my thing, I think. I tend to overthink things or analyze, but
It's so
part of
fun.
my education.
Yes, I love it. And your point of view has been, for me specifically, on parenting and self-improvement topics, so eye-opening. And I just love hearing your point of view. So today, we got some questions for Dr. Johnson, collected from family, friends, and listeners, any of their most burning psychology questions. And Megan is here to answer all of them. So, Megan, before we dig in, do you want to briefly explain your education and your career background?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So I went to Florida State University and I graduated with a degree in clinical psychology. While I was there, I was studying personality development, and I was specifically interested in psychopathy, which is a personality domain marked by callous and unemotional traits, lack of remorse, manipulation, lying, things of this nature. And I was interested in how these personality traits develop and was very interested in the biology behind these traits. So I became very interested in understanding hormones, especially stress hormones, and was able to link callous unemotional traits and psychopathy with a lack of stress response in adults and then later in adolescence. And the idea is that if you don't have a stress response when you are being socialized as a child, for instance, when we say something to a kid and we say, don't do this, do you see what you've done? You've made Bobby cry. Look at Bobby. That hurt his feelings. Don't do that again. Most of us would have an emotional response to that, and that is supported by a stress response that's underneath us. And so underneath the emotion is an actual biological change that occurs that says, oh, I'm stressed out because I just made somebody else cry. I feel terrible about that. I'm not going to do that again. People who have these traits sometimes are born with them. Sometimes they gain them through in their environmental situations and through adversity. they dampen their stress response over time because that's adaptive for them in that environment to not become stressed out because they're always being faced with adversity. Some kids are born with these though also. And so I was interested in understanding how this develops, what it looks like biologically, and how the course of their life looks. So I got really interested in personality. I was really interested in kids. I was one of only like a few people who really focused on children in my program. Like when kids came through the clinic and they needed a psychologist, I was the one that they got, or maybe one other person. But there weren't a ton of us. We were all very interested in children, and I was very interested especially in conduct disorder, things that went along with psychopathy. So conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, ADHD is housed under the same umbrella of what we call externalizing. So externalizing behaviors are sort of behaviors that you always can see, like you see it externally. So it's sort of that word sort of makes sense. You can see that they're having issues because you can see the problem. Internalizing is going to be things that you can't see per se, like things like anxiety and depression fall under an internalizing disorder. So no matter what, though, internalizing, externalizing, whatever the children had, I loved treating children, and that was sort of my jam. And then I went on to study risk-taking behavior in adolescence and really got interested in the hormonal and biological changes that occur naturally throughout development, because what we understand about normative development defines what is abnormal. And so my degree is in diagnosing abnormal, but that's defined especially for children in terms of what's developmentally appropriate for certain ages. So you really have to have a good foundation in that child development to be able to identify what's on the fringe and what needs treatment. And so I went to UC Berkeley, became a postdoc there, and really dove deep into the hormonal and biological changes, the neural processing, the organization of the brain during adolescence, especially because what we know about adolescence is that it's a time of significant neural plasticity, which means that the brain is just absorbing information almost anew during adolescence because there's this influx of hormones that's organizationally and activationally changing the brain as they develop during that period of time. And so for clinicians, yeah, it's amazing. For clinicians, it's great because if you can identify a trajectory or you can identify a window during the trajectory of development that has increased leverage for change, like adolescence, you can change development even faster during that period of time because you know that there's all these biological changes occurring anyways. So if you need to intervene, yeah.
This is fascinating. As a parent, this is so good to know.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I just love understanding kids and how they change and normative and non-normatively. So that was sort of what I really wanted to study. And I was very interested in risky behavior. I sort of changed I'm still studying psychopathy to a degree, but have really expanded, I think, to trying to understand things that could harm kids during development. So especially during adolescence, those would be things like taking risks ahead of time. You know, at what age do you start engaging in sexual activity? At what age do you start trying drugs? What causes you to do those things? And so that's really what I started studying, especially at Berkeley. And I was under a few different professors there, just being mentored, and then working at the think tank I mentioned last week, the Center for Research in Children's Health. So just trying to understand what causes kids to take these risks and how can we help them potentially use their risk-taking in good ways, like take positive risks in their life rather than risks that can really hurt them, especially if they just have that underlying trait anyways. They need to express it, and we have to give them a good way to express it as parents. So,
I love that. Well, I think that so many of the questions that were submitted by moms because that's who we are and that's who our network is. And so many of these questions that we have today are going to fit perfectly into your work and everything that you just spoke on. So are you ready to get into some questions?
I am. Yeah. I just want to preface this with these are my thoughts as a doctor, yes, but anything that I say really shouldn't be taken as therapy, because this isn't therapy. So I just want to make sure that that's clarified for people, and not everything is as clear cut as I may make it seem. I understand that there's always nuance to different situations. There's always more to understand. And that's really the point of my degree, is to take cases, individually and understand the full scope of things. So I'll be answering questions without knowing everything about every situation. And so I do encourage, if there's extra questions, to come back, to email us and or receive, professional help wherever you're at. So
okay, perfect.
With that in mind, yes, let's answer.
That's
okay.
Great. Okay, perfect. And then we're going to go ahead and omit the names of our friends, family, and listeners who submitted these questions, but we want to thank everyone for participating in this episode. So,
yes.
Question number 1 for Dr. Johnson. What are some signs to watch for that your young child, the person who submitted the question has a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, may be struggling with anxiety?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And I'm going to harken back to what I just said about internalizing versus externalizing disorders in children. So again, internalizing disorders would include anxiety and depression. Externalizing would be all the things I mentioned: ADHD, conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, and alcohol, initiation. So those things that are externalizing, we tend to see pretty clearly. Like when somebody has one of those disorders, you tend to see it. It's reported from the teacher. You're going to see it at home. It's going to be quite clear that there's an issue, because frankly, a lot of those symptoms are very annoying to adults. Adults are going to say, we need to get this treated because I just can't take this any longer.
Okay.
The same is not true for internalizing disorders. So kids that have anxiety and depression tend to not receive the services that they need, because most cannot see that they're having a troubling experience, because it's all inside. So if you actually even want to understand what a kid is going through for externalizing disorders, you can ask anyone around them, and the people around them are going to be better reporters about the symptoms than they are themselves. The opposite is true for internalizing disorders. So if you have a kid who's got anxiety or depression, their own word for it and them saying, I'm having a problem, is the best indicator that they are having a problem. Adults, if you ask the parents, they often don't see it. If you ask the teachers, they often don't see it either. And so kids are referred much more for externalizing than internalizing. So
that's so interesting and slightly heartbreaking, because children as young as 6 and 8, I'm sure, don't have the language to explain how they're feeling, or even the awareness of what anxiety and depression is.
Exactly. Yeah. So with that in mind, though, so if a parent or a teacher does have a concern about internalizing disorders like anxiety or depression, I would say that's the best indicator that a child probably needs to be assessed. Because if you're actually seeing it and it's apparent to you as a parent, then that's all that you need to go on. Because and it can be any sort of disorder that relating to anxiety, but you need somebody who's trained to figure out how to parse that apart and accurately diagnose such a thing, and then give empirically supported treatments for that disorder.
Okay.
So that would be my biggest thing, is you would see this, you would see it impacting and causing clinically significant distress or impairment in their social, home, family, school, other important areas of functioning. So when a disorder is if it's existing in the child, you'll see it impacting multiple domains of their life also. That's another good way to know.
Okay, so is it fair that if you are seeing something and that you may recognize as anxiety or depression that is one of these internal issues, to immediately seek help for your child? Because if you're seeing something, it might be much more prevalent for the child.
Yeah, it could be exactly. If it's
Okay.
rising to the awareness of an adult, that's when it's like, okay, wow, this really does need to be assessed because it's likely been lurking for a while
Yeah.
and untreated. And over time, that can get worse and worse. It can be a negative feedback loop where things just keep getting worse and worse. And so, nipping that in the bud, and especially when we talk about early intervention for kids, you can completely transform a kid's life and future life by treating it early rather than later. So
Okay.
the earlier
That
you can
yes,
intervene, the better.
the better.
Yeah.
Don't wait. Get help now.
Yes. Yes,
Great.
exactly.
Advocate for
Yeah.
your child because they can't advocate for themselves. Okay,
Exactly.
great.
Yeah.
Let's move on to question number 2.
Okay.
This is a great one. So, as a busy working mom, I struggle with the mental load as much as the physical. Oftentimes, I'll find myself slipping into a bit of depression vibe. Any advice on how to get out of this?
Oh, this is a
Okay.
question that I feel like most moms can relate to,
Really?
right?
Yeah, I
Um,
agree. Yes.
Geez, it's hard. It's hard being a mother. It's hard being a parent. It's
Yes.
hard being a mom. So, yeah, I would say, I mean, first of all, acknowledging that there is a load that you're carrying alone. Just, I mean, and talking to friends about that. I think that that is really useful in terms of finding support, people around you going through the same thing that you can offload on and talk to. Aside from that social support, I would say if you want to avoid a depression vibe, and I know exactly what this is, I feel it sometimes myself, is to make sure you're keeping the rest of your life in a very consistent routine. So that would include things like behavioral activation. This is something that we talk about a lot in therapy, especially when it has to do with depression, is making your body do the things you need to do. Even when you don't feel like doing it. So, one very common symptom of depression is just not wanting to try. Like you just don't even, you know, you used to walk, you stopped walking. Maybe you used to go to the grocery store, you stopped doing that. Behavioral activation is making yourself live life with your body, basically. Like go outside,
Okay.
get sunlight, move your body, exercise, behavioral activation again, exercise, because what we're doing when we're doing these things is we're intervening in a physical sense to impact your mental well-being. So you can actually change the chemistry in your brain by making your body move and getting those endorphins and getting feeling physical and getting your body going is really good for yourself. And then sleep hygiene is huge. So make sure you're going to bed and you're getting up at the same time every day and making sure that you have
Okay.
enough sleep every single day. And if you have the ability to only control one factor for your sleep, make it be when you wake up every day. That's
Oh,
the one.
interesting. The same time every day.
Yes, because
Okay.
that sets your rhythm. Your body follows a natural circadian rhythm. I studied a lot about this because it's related to hormones and how they change throughout the day. So you have to account for circadian rhythm when you're talking about cortisol and testosterone and things like that. So your body naturally, it wakes itself up and you have very high levels, your highest levels of all these hormones in the morning, and then they trickle off throughout the rest of the day. So you want to set this in motion and you want to make sure you're controlling when you wake up every single morning. And that's going to, doesn't treat depression. If you have a real clinical depression, it's not going to treat it, but even people who have tried and true major depressive episodes and things like that, controlling sleep and controlling when you wake up can take the edge off. So this is
Yes.
a really good thing to do. So making sure you are behaviorally you're activated, you're doing things, you're controlling your sleep hygiene. Balanced diet is another really important one because we know how sugar can impact us. If I have caffeine late in the day, I'm not going to sleep that night. So we're talking again about sleep, right? But
Yes.
control your caffeine intake, control your sugar intake. Make sure you're having a healthy vegetable-based diet so that you're getting all the nutrients that you need throughout the day. And then finally, schedule some me time. I mean, every one of us needs to take time for ourselves. We are, a lot of times, our full-time job, on top of the job that we have for an occupation, is taking care of kids, and so that's a lot of burden to take on. So we need to offload a little bit by taking care of ourselves and making sure that we are treating ourselves even to, very small pleasures, but things that give us happiness in life.
Yes.
So look for those simple pleasures that are in your life. Maybe it's the smell of a candle. Maybe it's taking a bubble bath. But things like that you can schedule for yourself to take care of yourself mentally and physically. So those are the things I would suggest.
I love this. I think this is a great reminder for all moms. I know when I'm putting into practice all the things you mentioned, my energy and mood is just amazing, especially the exercise piece. It's so key. But I think as a mom, we
Really
all
is.
just need those reminders to, when we put ourselves first and when we have all of those things lined up, we're going to be better at doing our other jobs, which is being a mom and whatever other work we may do. It's just so important.
Yeah.
All right. Ooh, this next question is a good one. It is, how do you spot a narcissist? So this is fascinating. I feel like narcissist has become like such a trendy word the last couple years. And there's lots of different things going around on social media about narcissism or narcissists. So I would love to hear your take on this question as well.
Yeah, so this is a really good question. There are some signs of a narcissistic personality, but you may not see them at first glance. It's often not till you get to know somebody a little bit better that you start to see the narcissistic traits coming out. But some of these traits would be a sense of self-importance, preoccupation with power. Often these folks come across as very socially dominant in conversations. So if you notice that, somebody who's really socially dominant in a conversation among friends or in a group of people, this can be sort of like a little bit of an indication. They come across as very entitled. They feel often like they should only be talking to people who are very important. So if you're not part of that crew, maybe you're a waitress. They're going to want to speak to the manager. They don't want to talk to you. So they want to talk
Oh,
to the most important person in the room because that's who is equal to
interesting.
themselves. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Uh-huh. They can be interpersonally exploitive or manipulative for their own gain. So some of these traits start to overlap with psychopathy. Because you might remember I mentioned that psychopaths do the same thing. They tend to be very manipulative, and there's actually a lot of personality overlap in the traits that we see for narcissism and psychopathy, and it's not altogether uncommon to have both.
Oh, that's frightening.
I know. They tend to be arrogant. Again, they similar to psychopathy. They lack empathy often. They must be admired, and so this is where it gets into like there's different types of narcissism out there. So some people are very vulnerable narcissists that if you prick their pride, they're going to get you back. So again, like you may not know that when you just meet somebody for the first time. In fact, some of these people may blow you away. They may be very charming. They may be very outgoing. They are the leader in the group. So it's not always completely maladaptive, but if it is a true like narcissistic personality disorder, then it is going to be maladaptive for them as well. They're going to find that they're not getting what they want out of life, and that may be why they come to seek treatment, or they are referred by somebody else saying you need to be seen
By their spouse. That's so interesting.
maybe their spouse. Yeah,
That's so
yeah,
interesting.
or
So
someone in their life.
is it possible that you could see someone as just very confident and successful and extroverted, but then over time you may be able to see that those behaviors are all self-serving behaviors and they're lacking empathy, so there might be
Yeah.
something else there?
Yeah. So like
Oh,
when we would
interesting.
study corporate America, we would study people who work in corporate America, and many of us maybe know people like this, but the ability to step on others to get what you want, and the
Oh,
ability to not feel bad. Now, is it a tricky balance? Yes, because if you are in corporate America or you have a big, important, you know, job where a lot's riding on your decisions, then sometimes a certain amount of this is effective for your job. So there's actually a whole dimension of psychopathy. Like there's a whole
oh,
nother area you can study of like how do these symptoms make you actually really productive at your job. So not to say that these
oh,
things are
okay.
always bad, but they do tend to occur more in men than women, just
Of
naturally.
course.
Um, right. Yeah, but they tend to be testosterone linked. That's just all there is
Right.
to it. So
Okay.
women have testosterone too, but we just don't have as much. And some of these, like the dominance, tends to be like running with hierarchy, and hierarchy goes with testosterone. So yeah.
Interesting. So maybe so
Hmm.
the best way to spot a narcissist would potentially be that you might have to get to know them a little bit better because initially it might just seem like, when they say people have CEO energy, like I love that
Hmm.
energy. It's just like really confident and really um charismatic,
Right.
but potentially that could change down the line and you'd see other not so positive traits.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
wonder
Yeah, I think underneath you would start to see some things creep out.
how common is a narcissistic personality trait because it feels like it's everywhere on social media right now, but in reality, is this very common?
Yeah, so personality in general exists along a dimension. So you can imagine like a bell
Mm,
curve of
okay.
of any personality trait. You're going to see it, vary. If it's a tried and true clinical disorder, though, that's going to be much more rare. So I would say less than 1%
Mm,
of the population would have something that's diagnosable. But that's not to say that they have maybe some certain traits. And often when you meet somebody like this, you may be either impressed by them, like you just mentioned, or if you're like me and I'm immediately charmed by somebody, I like immediately question it. I immediately start looking. I'm like, what's going on here? Because I've just seen so many people clinically with some of the stuff that it makes. Probably I'm a little bit too sensitive to it, but if I'm charmed, I'm questioning immediately.
that's the psychoanalysis that I love.
Yeah. 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 So I hope that's
Oh,
helpful. I love talking about personality. It's so fun.
it's so interesting to me. Okay, I
Yeah.
think that was great. Let's move on to the next question. Should I see a therapist if I have moderate anxiety, like worrying about my kids getting hurt constantly?
Yes. Yes, you
Yes.
should definitely go see somebody for that. That's not if it's if you ever are wondering, is it bad enough where I should go see a therapist? Ask yourself, is it impacting my life? And is it impacting my life more days than not?
Mm,
And is it having is it taking a toll? And I would say worry like that about your kids getting hurt constantly, that's taking a toll on you, and you should definitely go be seen for that. I would also question something like checking. Like if you're worried about your kids getting hurt constantly, are you checking all the time? Because then that turns into like a question of, is it a generalized anxiety disorder? Is it a
mm,
specific disorder? Is it OCD? So OCD would
okay.
be like the checking stuff, and to be completely open and honest, that's something I have to check on myself, is make sure that I'm not checking. I will check to make sure I'm not checking, because I know it's something that I tend to do is I'll check a lot. So
Uh-huh.
that falls under like the perfectionistic sort of things that go with like OCD, and it gets ingrained. So yes, nip it in the bud, because you don't want to live life like that, and you shouldn't have to. And there's the wonderful thing about anxiety is that it remits so quickly with amazing,
Mm.
therapy. If you can get an empirically supported treatment for anxiety, you should see remittance of those symptoms very fast. Um,
Oh, that's so good to know. That's really
yeah,
good to know.
yeah. And I mentioned just to clarify, empirically supported treatments. I've mentioned this a couple times. This is because I come from a research institution that it got ingrained in us that if you're going to be treating a disorder, number one, you need to have an accurate diagnosis. Number two, you need to choose a treatment that has been proven to work. And so I get maybe a little bit of flack about this, but that's okay. I am not Freudian. My sort of the way that I analyze things is from a CBT perspective, cognitive behavioral therapy perspective. So we were taught in our school that if you have a problem, it doesn't really help you to dig into your past to fix it. What you need to do to fix it is in the here and now, and then that trickles down to the rest of your life. And so there's argument in the field about this. People who are more Freudian in their approach will like go in and like investigate childhood and things like that. That's actually not necessarily an empirically supported treatment, and there's actually not a lot supporting remittance because of that sort of therapy. So I'm taking a hard line here, and I'm saying I definitely think you should look for a cognitive behavioral therapist, especially for something like anxiety, and you would need to have an empirically supported treatment, a treatment that has been demonstrated to work across multiple studies from different investigators, and that's how you choose. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yes, it does. I love how you're able to take the language and make it really clear. So that made sense to me. And I'm wondering being a mom, there is certain levels of anxiety just with regards to your children. So with this question, when would it be too much? You mentioned if it's affecting your day to day, but a little bit of worry here and there is normal.
Yes. Yeah. I think most of us worry, probably. I mean, I would say this is probably true. Most of us worry and don't worry about it for worrying too much. So again,
sure.
is it rising to your knowledge? Is it rising, are you starting to notice that you're worrying and that you're not happy about that? That's when it starts to be like, okay, yes, if your answer is yes and you're worrying and it's rising to the level where you're noticing that you're worrying and you're worrying about whether you're worrying too much,
then it's time to seek
That's a great
help.
indicator.
Yes.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Okay.
That's a good time to seek. If people ask, should I seek anything? Should I ever seek therapy for anxiety? I'm always like, yes, because now if you notice it, then you should. That's like a good indicator that you should go seek some help for it.
Perfect. I think that's really clear and easy. So if you're listening and you're wondering, okay, great. Let's move on to the next question. We've got a little list here. When should I worry about my tween or teen and depression and anxiety? What is the difference between hormonal teenage angst and clinical anxiety or depression?
This is such a good question. I mean, I love this question because it gets to the heart of why I study this. I study the onset of mental illness in adolescence, because that trajectory I talked about, where there's this increased neural flexibility and there's this influx of all these hormones, this is a monumental period of time during our development where the brain is sort of set. So it's very changeable throughout adolescence, and then it gets set, and then we're set for life. It's not like you can't change things, but the brain is so moldable during adolescence. This is also a period of time where we see the onset of these hormones coming in, and these hormones are linked to starting to worry about social status. And social status is such an important thing for kids in this age group, because they start to compare themselves to other people. They want to be accepted. They are much more sensitive to social inputs. So, if you have a kid, you do tend to see, anxiety and depression especially increase in girls during this period of time. And this also coincides with the period of time where they're starting to have a lot of body development, and they may not know what to do with that. They may be feeling judged by it. They may be feeling very sensitive to it. For boys and girls, finding social status, being able to find your hierarchy and where you fall on it and who your people are, so important. And if you can't find that, or you're having difficulty with that during that period of adolescence, you can see anxiety and depression sort of mount during that period of time. So you'll see a lot of disorders become very prevalent during during adolescence. And it's just all these body changes, these brain changes. And it's often like hormones pulse. So they don't just, they're not like constant throughout the day and throughout weeks. It's not like this like constant, production of testosterone or estrogen. It pulses. So like one day you're going to have amazingly high levels and it's like just pulsing into your body. And the next day you're going to be back to normal. So you can also see things like, we call it puberty days. You'll see kids have puberty days. And it's just one of those days where maybe your kid's being a butthead or maybe your kid's so emotional. It's like, where'd my normal kid go? They'll be back in a couple days. It's just the normal development that occurs. So I think when should you be concerned about that? Definitely during adolescence. Keep an eye on it.
And what age range is adolescence?
I would say, starting at like age 11, 12. Through 16, 17, 18. Like that whole range actually is just filled with all kinds of changes. But that beginning part especially is just so hard for kids. And there's so many body changes. Like, I don't know if you remember just like waking up one day and your arms are just so long or your legs are so long. And then you start seeing, maybe your kid grows up all of a sudden. It's like you grew like an inch or two and then they start falling all over the place. And it's like, well, you just had a huge growth spurt. And now you have these really long legs and you're remembering how to use them again, So you'll see these huge changes and it's just a lot for kids to go through. So the more supportive we can be during that period of time, the better. You do also see adolescence limited disorders occur during this period of time. So you will see, so I used to study like conduct disorder for instance, and you'll see this for other things as well, but conduct disorder can begin in childhood. You can also see adolescence limited conduct disorder. So it's like, kids that start being very disruptive in school and getting in all kinds of trouble and trespassing and, vandalism and all this stuff. But it starts at 12, 13, it ends at 18 and they're done with it and life goes on. And it's hormone linked. They're going through all these changes during puberty. And some of those things may cause them to have better social status with their friends. And so because of that, they're going to do those things.
Oh,
so
that makes sense. That makes sense. So what would be the signs that there would potentially be something clinically wrong that the parent may want to seek help for?
Yeah, there's so many things. For depression, definitely if you see more days than not that your teen is down, if you can see the affect, that if the affect, which is like the emotion on their face, if their body language and their facial expressions are demonstrating to you that they're down and it's more days than not, I would seek treatment. You can also just ask your teen. A lot of times people sort of shy back from asking things like, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Have you hurt yourself? Or how are you feeling right now? Are you feeling sad? And how often do you feel sad? And if the answer to those things raises a red flag or even a yellow flag, it never hurts to get an assessment done and just see if more treatment is needed to keep them healthy. For anxiety as well, I think we talked about before, if you're seeing them more days than not seem very anxious or, indicators of anxiety would be like lack of eye contact. Maybe it'd be like a tic. Maybe it would be something that they do, maybe rocking. I'm not sure. But if you're noticing things behaviorally that sort of raise it to your consciousness, or maybe they just self-report to you, I'm feeling stressed. Never hurts, again, to get some supportive counseling at that period of time and just help them through that momentous shift that their body is taking, and make sure that they stay healthy. Because we see rates of anxiety and depression really go up during this period of time. So it's a good time to keep your eyes on it.
That's great advice. It is such a rough time, just thinking back to personally going through it. Now, one of my favorite books is How to Hold On to Your Kids by Dr. Gabor Mate. And in that, he's studied attachment, and he speaks a lot about the connection with parents and the attachment being the way to hold on to your kids, so to say. And when you mentioned here that the angst in your teenage years is based a lot on social status, I'm wondering, that's the first time I had heard that, but of course that makes sense. I'm wondering, can the attachment to your parent or your family as a whole, can that overcompensate for some of this? Like if your child is not in the social place that they would like to be, and you don't have control over that as a parent, but you can control the attachment environment with the family, can that help overcompensate?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
We've studied that in a few different ways. We've studied attachment during adversity in early. This isn't during teen years. I'll talk about that in a second, but during early years. So years 1 through 5 are also very, very important for setting up that attachment and that security that when I need something, I'm going to get it, and I have a loving and caring environment that sets your biology also. So I've studied like autonomic nervous system reactivity in babies and through age 5, and found that maternal sensitivity can actually offset the effects of things like poverty and adversity early in life. So then that
Wow. So
maternal and the,
your mom being sensitive and empathetic to your needs.
just being warm, yeah, warm and sensitive, giving you that sets you up, for life. That during that period of time, that's when your autonomics, it's like your heart rate, things that are like more on the autonomic side, they get set there. So right then is when that sort of gets set for when you're, through the rest of development, it sort of gets set during those early life years. So it's really important then. And then we've also found, yes, family identity and family cohesion can be very, very supportive and combat the effects of stress during adolescence. So we've studied things like families that have immigrated to America, and the stress of immigration, involving yourself in the new culture, which is becoming, more American, and the stress that it comes along with that having a really strong family bond and a really strong family identity. And that can be formed by doing chores for your family, helping around the house, things like that really tie you to your family can be very, very helpful and can offset the effects of the stress that comes along with, kids in a new environment, and their families aren't necessarily from here, and the acculturation that they experience. So it's not exactly answering what you've said, but I have found in some of my research that yes, if they have a good family identity and bond, that can be supportive and combat the effects of other types of stress during adolescence.
That's
So
great. That's great. So
I'm
I
sure
think
there's more
it
on
is,
that. Yeah.
yeah, it's fair to assume that during those teenage years, the attachment to the parents and the family is equally as important as years 1 through 5, because they are going through so much and the hormones are there. So even though they're older and they may be showing more independence, they need you just as much.
They do. Yeah, there's
Oh.
also great research I just read recently about the importance of you don't have to be present, like in the same room with them, but being around and accessible during adolescence is also super protective for them to not get involved in, all the risk-taking behaviors that I study. So if you're around and they can access you, you don't have to be, you can be upstairs, you can be somewhere else, but just to be around for them, that's really protective as well for adolescents. So
I
another
love
piece of
that. I
positive,
love.
yeah, advice there.
Well, yeah, this was great. We potentially have a whole nother episode on this topic
Yeah,
alone. But let's get to some more questions.
sure.
This is a funny one that how bad does yelling at our kids screw them up? She's asking for a friend. And then what about cursing around them?
Oh, yeah. So I don't think yelling, it's so individualized, right? So some kids are so sensitive and responsive, and one thing we talk about is goodness of fit between parent and child, and the parenting style that you use with one child may not be adaptive for the next child that you have. So to some degree, some of these things are going to be dependent on like child temperament. Say, for instance, if I yell at my middle child, she will burst into tears. Like I can say, just not even yelling at her, just say boo. And that's going to be enough to send that one over the edge. Now, my eldest, if I am not super firm with her and directive with her, often multiple times, she doesn't get it and it doesn't matter to her. And so I think there's some degree of like, is yelling good? Probably not. Like what we need to do is like model good behavior for our kids so that they have something to emulate. And if they see us yelling, they're going to think that yelling gets them what they want. Same thing with hitting. If we hit, then they think that hitting gets them what they want. That's not what we want to train our children to do, is to do those things. We want them to use effective strategies. So does it screw them up if you yell at them once or twice? Probably not. But do keep your mind on attending to when you do yell. Are there things precipitating or coming before the yelling that could you help yourself calm down before you address the situation? And have an eye on effectiveness rather than sort of emotional decisions. So I often catch myself getting emotional about things. It's not that that's a bad thing. It's telling me information when I have emotions. Those are good. But when my emotions become not effective and actually get in the way of me having effective strategies with my children, that's when they are potentially like harmful in that situation. So I would say, attend to things that come before the yelling. Calm yourself down beforehand. Ask yourself, what's the most effective strategy to get them to do what I need them to do, and use that instead. And often that's not yelling or corporal punishment. It's often behavioral strategies, because as I have said to you many times, Sarah, we're all just rats, and you can either reward good behavior, or you can remove things that are good, to teach kids how to be good. So a really good timeout, and I'm talking about a real timeout. I'm talking about a chair in the corner quietly where they need to sit there, and it's not in their room where they have all the toys, but that can actually be a really effective strategy. One, to help a kid calm down, and two, to learn that if I don't behave, then I get removed from my situation, but I want to be part of the situation. So it's just often at times that's one of the best things we can recommend, is a really good timeout where it's just a chair in the corner and a quiet corner, and then they need to sit there for X amount of minutes.
Interesting.
A couple minutes.
So instead of yelling and cursing, try a timeout.
Try a
and
timeout.
maybe the timeout is for you.
Yeah, it can be for you. Oftentimes I need a timeout for a second. I'm like, we just need to take a second. Both of us, let's take a timeout. Let's come back to this in a minute. And then the question, well, I'm going to get to that in a second. The other thing to remember is catch a child being good. This is a big concept that we are all about for kids, for training new patterns of behavior, is if you want a kid to repeat a good behavior, catch them doing it on their own, reward them with praise, and then keep rewarding it over and over and over and over again. Every time you notice it, reward it, because that's what increases good behavior. So if we don't want the bad behavior, let's help them replace it with something that is a good alternative, and then reward that strategy instead.
I love that.
Yeah. And then the other thing about cursing around them, I think that's a moral sort of decision. Like, is it something you accept in your household to have cursing versus not? I would say if you don't want your kids to curse, don't curse in front of them, or else that's what you're modeling for them to do. If you some parents don't really care that much. And so in that circumstance, I would say, once they become old enough, teach them the circumstances when they can say a bad word versus when they can't. That can be hard at younger ages, I'll say. Like at the ages that we have right now, I would say that might be hard to teach. Like you can say this at home, but don't say this at school, because we want them to be effective at school as well, and not get themselves into trouble by doing what we do. So that's the only thing I would say there. And again, it goes back to effectiveness. Help them be effective and help them choose and make good decisions. So
perfect. I love that. How about this one? Best advice for managing phones and social media with kids.
Oh, this is a good one. Yes. So we're going to get into this, I think, in our future, Sarah, with the phones and social media. I do think that these things, especially for girls, are causing increased rates of anxiety, depression, and even suicidal behavior in kids. So, especially during adolescence, it's another source of social threat and evaluation. So, if you're evaluating yourself against what you see on social media and you never quite add up, that's more than I think we had growing up. Like, as I remember growing up, I didn't have the threat of something being posted. I didn't have, I think we evaluated ourselves probably against the photos that we saw on magazines.
That's true.
But it wasn't necessarily like our own social group that we were seeing all the time, posting all of this stuff. So I think be very careful about when you get a phone, what kind of controls you have over the phone. One amazing piece of technology that I just learned about, which I think it's like fantastic. It's called the Gab, and
I don't know what that is.
It's a watch. So if you remember, there were some kids hanging out with us at Disneyland, and one of them had a watch. It's called a Gab watch, and it's amazing. You have complete control over. There's no social media. There's only the ability to text certain pre-approved numbers. There's a button you push for an emergency. It goes straight to the primary contact, which would be us. And then I think you can receive phone calls on it from your primary contacts, if I'm not mistaken. But you definitely can text on it. And so I'm seeing more and more parents. It also has a monitoring device, so you know who they've texted when. You don't know what they've texted, I don't think. I think you probably could find out, but that feels a little overboard to me. But you can find out who they've texted, and you know where they are, because if it's on their hand, then it has a monitoring device and it tells you where they're at. So another piece of like security for them. And then, if
great.
God forbid they need you quickly at school, press the emergency button and you just know that means I'm coming to get you.
Okay, I love that. That's great.
I love that too. Yeah.
Okay, good advice. And probably as our girls get a little bit older, this is a topic we're going to want to dive into even more. They're still so little, they don't know what this all is. But definitely a concern in the future. Next question. Is it okay if my kids see me, their mom, naked? When does this become inappropriate, or could it scar them? And then the same question for opposite sex siblings. This is interesting. We don't have opposite sex siblings, but this is interesting. I do wonder that as well.
Yeah. In terms of seeing mom naked, I think it's different for boys rather than girls. And some of this is like maybe some of my value judgment too. I know some families don't care who sees them naked, who doesn't. I like for us, I have 3 little girls, so I just don't care. I change, and they don't think anything of it. Yeah, they don't think anything. They're like, whatever. And I know my mom was the same with me. Like, it was just like, whatever. It's like just girl stuff. So it wasn't like a big deal for me, but if I had little boys, I'd probably be a little bit, more careful as they're growing up to just, cover up and not make myself or him uncomfortable. But
maybe
I think
notice
judgment.
If it's making the child feel off or uncomfortable, then maybe they've aged out of being able to see the parent naked.
Yeah.
And then how about same-sex siblings? Or opposite sex.
Opposite sex siblings. I think like younger ages, it's fine, like toddlers to take like a bath together or whatever. I think it's fine. But I mean, again, just notice how much they're noticing. And whenever they start noticing a little bit too much, that's when it's time to stop, That's when it's time to separate. And definitely by school age, like they should be taking their own baths, or their own showers, I would say at that point. I think it's a value judgment. I think it's what you notice. It's, opposite sex siblings. I mean, I had brothers. I knew what they had. It was like but gross, you know. It's like, just,
Yeah.
you need your bath. Like, they're pooping in the tub and stuff anyways. Like, I don't want to be with these little boys. Get me out of here. They're going to kill me. Yeah. So,
Okay. That's good to know. Good to know.
yeah. From Dr. Megan. There you go.
I love it. All right, let's move on.
Okay.
Is it unhealthy to daydream constantly? Like envisioning a different life and playing it out in my head often while I'm doing mundane tasks around the house.
Oh, this one hurts my heart a little.
Yeah, me too.
I know what it is to daydream, and think of what else it could be. I would say if it feels unhealthy to you, if it's a happy escape, then that's one thing. I would say if you're daydreaming constantly though, but and thinking of a different life and playing it out, I would say I would encourage you to be more mindful to your current environment and perhaps find happiness in places that are around you. So this goes back to like being trying to be centered in your life. And I do think too much daydreaming causes us to become uncentered and not rooted in our current environment. This happens when we look too much to the future or think too much about the past also. We tend to miss what's like right in front of us. Now, when I'm doing a mundane task, sometimes I got a podcast on or something like that I enjoy. So again, if it brings you happiness to think of like a new story or something like that, then that's one thing. So I'm not sure if that's how this is or if it's more like I wish my life was like this. And if that's the case, then I would say, do try to be more grounded in your environment and make sure you're able to observe your environment that you're in and notice things you appreciate. A heart of gratitude often just, I don't know, it's a good way to approach your life.
Yes. Finding gratitude in what you have can
Yes.
so often pull away from maybe what you're daydreaming about. And I love what you said, centering yourself. I mentioned on the last podcast that I'm reading The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And this book is just so much about the power of now, of being in this exact moment. But to your point, it could be fun to daydream and we all need a little escape. And, maybe this is, instead of sitting on the couch in front of a TV show, you're cleaning your house and you have a wild imagination. So maybe to your point, Megan, if it becomes obsessive or it's taking you away from your current situation, then maybe that's there's my advice from the not doctor.
No, I think that's good advice. It's good advice.
It just hurt. This question hurt my heart, and I wanted to chime in.
I know. Yeah, it hurts my heart, and also I resonate with it. I also identify with this question. We all have dreams, and it's not a bad thing to have those dreams. Maybe it's prompting you to tell you need to make a little bit of a change in your life to make it what this dream is. I don't know exactly what the dream is, or if it's completely unachievable, or if maybe there's an aspect to it. Of it that you could bring into your life to bring more fullness and happiness and presence. But in terms of like actual skills to use to be present in your life, really good ones come from this therapy called dialectic behavior therapy. And it tells us to be, to first observe with our senses. So just use senses and observe touch, with your eyes, with your nose, but don't judge. So a non-judgmental, just observation of your environment. Then describe. So use words to describe in a non-judgmental way what's around you, very factually. Like what a bug would see if there's a fly on the wall, what would they see? That's what you're describing. Like, for instance, I see computer screen. I see wall. The wall is beige. I smell, I don't know, my soda drink that's sitting next to me. For instance, like observe, describe, then participate. Put yourself into that situation fully. But you can slow time down and become very immersed in the current moment by doing these 3 steps: observe, describe, then participate. And when you participate, do it fully, one-minded. Nothing else is on your mind. And if you notice your mind's going somewhere else, bring it right back to the present. And so this is a really good way to become centered in your current environment, and find mindfulness. Yeah.
I love that.
I do too.
I think those
I
are
use
great
it
tips.
all the time.
Just in general, I'm going to start implementing that.
Yeah.
I love it.
I use that all the time. Like when I learned this, I was like, oh my gosh, it's like life changing. It's just like, how do you become centered? How do you become mindful? You actually need the skills. Somebody has to tell you how to do that. So,
well, it's so
to be able to
funny
put words to it.
in yoga classes, they always say center yourself, but I don't think anybody's ever explained it that clearly with those steps. That's great.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, how about this question? Marriage after becoming parents has been harder than I thought it would. What are signs that we should try couples therapy, or should all married couples be in therapy no matter what?
I definitely agree with the latter. We should all be in couples therapy all the time. No, I do think there are critical periods during a marriage where you really do need couples therapy, and it's not something to be ashamed of. It's throwing yourself a lifeline at that moment. Now, can it be expensive? Yes. Is it worth it? Also, yes. I say that as somebody who has done therapy with couples, as well as somebody who has gone through couples marriage counseling before. So at periods in your life when you have to make a very important decision, maybe you aren't getting along well with your spouse, and being observant to the behavior you have around your children, for instance, like fighting around kids, is very maladaptive for them and hurts them psychologically. So, keeping your eyes open for that. If that's happening a lot, that's a good time to go get therapy. They will give you some skills, help you get on the same page. I firmly believe that it's a great thing to try out if you feel like, do we need it? The answer is probably yes. Go ahead and try. Find a good one and give it a shot. It can't be really hurtful. It's not hurtful to try this. It can be definitely very helpful. So the upside there is good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, how about this question? I keep catching myself doing things that my parents did that I hated, like being visibly irritated at my kids, when really I need a break. How do I stop this?
That's such a good question. I think we probably all have an aspect of this to ourselves where we remember things our parents did and we think, I don't ever want to do that. But somehow it just seeps right in there, and all of a sudden I am my mom.
It's in your subconscious.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, that was something I wanted to not do with my kids. Like I saw this and I just decided I don't want to do this. I'm going to break this cycle. Now, I'm not talking about my mom specifically when I'm talking about this because she listens to this, but I can resonate, generally with that idea that there are things that we've seen other people do that we don't want to do with our kids. I think when we notice that, like for instance, this person said when they become visibly irritated at their kids, notice what came first. Sometimes we'll build a model where we're like, well, what came before what, and what precipitated the irritation, and were there red flags or even yellow flags that it was going that way? And if so for instance, for this person, they've become irritated with their kids, and that is expressed in certain ways. What happened before that they maybe could have noticed that they were about to do this, and could they have caught it right then? And is there another behavior they can supplement? Oftentimes we just need to take a moment, take some time and space, and circle back around to it. And so for me, like taking a step away for a second before I address the situation, before I get angry, that can be the thing I've chosen I'm going to do instead. But choose something that you want to replace the irritation with that can give you some time and space from the situation. Now, can we always have time and space from our kids? No, but maybe I can put them, in the playroom and go make a lunch for a second before I address the situation. I can take mental space, even if I can't take physical space from them. And that way it doesn't build into this big, angry or irritated display for the kids. And again, it goes back to also being mindful, observing and describing your situation before you participate in it. Like I am observing my kid doing something, again, try to be non-judgmental. My kid's throwing food at the window. The food is red. And I mean, again, like what I'm noticing is I'm feeling something, my heart's starting to beat faster. These are indicators that I need to take a second, go center myself and come back in a rational, clear mind and effectively tell them, don't, explain myself, give rationale to the child why you don't do this. Now you have to clean this up because I will not do it for you. But things that are going to teach them not to do this again. And also I'm coming at it with a clear head. And I so resonate with this because I need a clear head before I can blow up. That's like my tendency is I blow up. And then that's no good for anybody,
No,
So
I resonate with this as well, but I'm laughing because it keeps bringing to mind the scene from the Sex and the City movie when Charlotte is making either cookies or cupcakes with her girls, and they're toddlers and little kids, and she has a moment, and I think she says something along the lines of, I just need a moment, because she's wearing this beautiful dress, and all of a sudden she has pink frosting all over her white dress, and she shuts herself in the pantry, and she's like crying and breathing hard. But she took her moment, and then she came out, and she's like, okay.
That's so funny. I've seen social media posts, too, of like people just shutting themselves in the pantry with like some licorice and being like, you will not believe what my kid just did. And they say they're just eating their candy, and it's like, okay, I get it. Take your time for a second, and then you can go back to it.
A healthy tactic.
It is, yeah. Take a second for yourself and just observe. And if you do blow up, the best thing to do is don't be judgmental of yourself. Don't beat yourself up about it, but do try to find out what happened beforehand in a non-judgmental way. Because again, judging ourselves doesn't help the situation. It's not like I need to feel the judgment from myself. Like I already don't like that it happened. So let's just wipe away all that judgment, because come on, being a mom is really hard, and do better next time by seeing what leads up to that beforehand. And you can analyze what just happened to find that thing that you can say that was the yellow flag, that was the red flag, that the anger was coming or the irritation was coming. And then next time what I'm going to do instead is X, Y, or Z.
Okay.
And have a plan.
Have a plan. I love that.
And over time you break that cycle because it becomes second nature to do this other thing instead. So it works. Just gotta give it a shot.
This Q&A episode is so informational. I'm going to put so many things into practice. I just love it.
I'm going to listen to it myself, because some of these things I'm saying, I probably should do this myself. Yeah.
Oh,
I know.
It's good reminders.
Good.
This is just being a mom life, right? These are all great reminders.
It is.
All right.
Yep.
How about this question? What does codependent mean? I keep hearing this referred to as negative within the family dynamic, but what does it really mean, and how do we prevent it?
Yeah. So codependent is usually used within I think it was initially created in the context of substance abuse. So when one partner is using substances, but the other person is enabling the bad behavior, that's that codependence. So it's when this other person almost needs to be needed by this other person, because the one person's dependent on the savior. The savior is or on the person who can come help them, and then the person who can help them becomes codependent on being needed and feeling that sense of being needed. So I think initially this question might have been also like, how is it different than being enmeshed? And maybe that's a separate question I'd seen. I don't know. But there is a
question down here that said, What is the difference between attachment and enmeshment, specifically in relation to
Oh,
children and parents?
there we go.
Is
Okay. So, yeah, so I think going back to codependent within the family, if you have a situation where one person needs to be needed, that becomes the codependence. Usually you're saving somebody, and usually that's, I think, more in the domain of like a relationship rather than with your kids.
okay.
When you're enmeshed, that is a little bit more family focused. So that has to do with lack of boundaries between kids and their parents, and where the kids basically have to do things to make the parent feel good, or make the parent proud of them, or whatnot. But it's sort of like where the parents are so expectant of certain things from their kids, and their kids have to do those things so that the parent feels like that sense of importance. It's more like that, where like, and the boundaries between who's the parent and who's the kid become very hard to decipher. Like there's not very good boundaries there because they've become sort of molded into this same unit, and that's really bad for kids. Kids need to have their own sense of identity, separate from their parents, and they are not responsible for our mental well-being. And any sense of that is going to be really bad for the kid, I think, and should be avoided. So I think that
Okay.
that's what that is. Attachment's a good thing. I mean, in general,
Yes.
being attached with your child means that you know, your kid has a certain temperament. You're meeting that temperament where they are, and you're relating strongly to them and giving them the love and support that they need, so that they feel a sense of self-worth and confidence in themselves to go and do what they need to do in their environment proudly and you know, with confidence. We want our kids to be very confident in
Yes.
themselves, and that we support them. That would be like ideal. And so having a really nice attachment bond with your child will provide that.
Support that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. That's some good clarifying answers there. How about this one? How do you break generational cycles best? I hated the way I was parented as a child, but I'm exhausted trying to do it better for my kids.
That's really hard. Yeah. Generational cycles do exist. We know certain patterns of behavior are replicable from generation to generation, and it's modeled behavior. So we've seen things done a certain way, and that's the model that we have to break. The best way is to make sure that you have lots of support and that you have a defined vision for how you want it to look, not just what you don't want it to be, but what you do want it to be. And you know, like it's not good enough just to say I don't want to yell at my kid. You have to change that to what you actually want it to be. Yeah, I want to have this style of parenting with my kid. Or here's how I wish I would have responded in that moment. So I'm going to do my best to do that from now on. And again, looking for those indicators before the pattern begins, or maybe even mid-cycle when you're in the middle of the pattern. Just stop it. Stop that pattern from, you know, fully completing, and change it before it gets to the point where you know you're not happy with your behavior any longer. So again, going back to like the irritation, looking for like, I don't want to be an irritated parent. I don't want to give them that impression. What are things I can do with a clear mind right now when I'm not upset? What are things I can do to demonstrate that I love them and I support them? Or if I need to discipline them, how do I do that in a way that is thoughtful and premeditated rather than just reactionary in the moment? So having that proactive thought process beforehand and coming up with what that is like the first step. And then the second step is to notice when that pattern is starting to occur where you're going to go do that thing you wish you didn't do anymore that your parents maybe did. notice that it's starting to happen and say, okay, breaking it right now. I'm breaking it with time and space, and I'm going to come back in a moment, and I'm going to implement the strategy that I already selected when I was not hot, to handle the situation in a more cool, calm, and collected and effective manner. So I think that would be my best advice. Now, could you use a partner for that? Yeah, you could. It would always be great to have a therapist there helping you figure that out, having somebody who understands parents and attachment and strategies for stopping. That's the hardest part is our kids do act up, and then how do we stop it? So making sure that we're using strategies that are effective, that's the best, I think, and that teach a good or modeling a good behavior for them as well. So yeah, I hope that helps. I think this is one where like you could use a partner for this and use some coaching and help, because it's difficult. It's really hard. This is a hard one to break, but you can do it for sure.
You can.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
Yes,
yeah, exactly.
Always the most positive attitude. I love it.
Yeah.
This is kind of a broad question. How best can I support my child's overall mental health?
Oh, that's a good one. Broadly, children need to be loved, and they need to have a foundation, I think a household foundation that is predictable, and where they know where their boundaries are, and they know what's good and what's not good, and what's right and what's not right, and that you aren't, reactive in the moment again. Like going back to what we were just talking about, we're never the best when we're just like reacting to what's happening in our environment. We're the best when we're like being proactive in a cool headspace, making decisions. So I think, providing just stability, support, love, and predictability is just a huge one for kids. They need to know what's next. They need to feel that stability for themselves, with their relationships with their parents. I think when things become unpredictable in an environment, that's when you start to see really bad, for instance, like physiological symptoms. Like I studied adaptive calibration of stress systems in children, and you do see like these different reactionary styles in kids who have a lot of unpredictability in their life versus kids who don't. And actually the unpredictability causes them to be very stressed out to begin with, and then they dampen their stress responses over time and become less open to environment, because environment always makes them stressed out. And so that's not good for your body, and you sort of downregulate your body over time, and then that's not good either for the long term. You do need to have a healthy stress reaction to accurately, respond to your environment. So you need to feel, sometimes you need to feel a little bit of stress to prompt you to do something. And kids who have had really, really rough, upbringings, who have a lot of unpredictability, they dampen. And so you don't want that either. You want some level of predictability for them. A little bit of adversity is okay. In fact, it's a little bit healthy to have, some challenges you're overcoming. And I'm not talking about serious ones. I'm talking about like, I'm trying to, make my grades better, or I'm coming up, I have a difficult person. I'm being bullied at school. Things like that, as long as it's not lasting forever. Sometimes like things like that happen, and kids are very resilient to it. So we want to just keep that resilience up. We want to support them. We want them to be adaptive to their environments and not closed off. And so, yeah, I don't know where I'm going with all that.
Yeah, no, you know what? That kind of leads into the next question, which was tips on raising confident kids.
Oh. Yeah, that's a good one. Again, catch a child being good. When you notice an act of bravery, you notice an act of confidence. When your child says, I want something and I'm going to go do it. Anytime you see something like that, I would praise it. That would be definitely worthy of praise and celebration. Like the other day, we went out to lunch, and our girls went to the potty together by themselves. Like, what an act of bravery, what an act of confidence. We knew they were safe. Like we knew they were
Yes.
safe, but the proximity of going to the bathroom by themselves, like it just was like small things like
Yes.
that when you see it and saying, I noticed that you used the potty by yourself. You did a great job. Kudos to you. Like you're
Yes.
wonderful job, and making sure they know like, wow, you're really brave and I support that. They need to know also the difference between bravery and risk taking. So I would not want them to go too far with their bravery and get into the car with a drunk driver or do something super risky to themselves. Like my eldest tends to get ourselves into situations like really high up into a tree. And it's like, I noticed that you need to feel this sense of riskiness, but also I'm a little concerned for your safety. So making sure they understand the balance between those things, it's hard to teach, but
Yes.
we do want confident kids. We want kids that feel a sense of, that they're able to respond to their environment in a way that feels good to them and that they stand up for themselves and they use their voice. And so those are things I always praise with my kids, is making sure that they know, I notice that they're really confident and that they're very brave and things. And it's also okay not to feel that way all the time. So validating that, those feelings and helping them feel supported, I think also increases their own confidence for what they can do.
That's great. I love hearing this. I know this is a question I've asked you often, and I can't hear it enough. Just having it reiterated, those tips on raising brave and confident kids. It's just so good to hear it again and again and again, so then we can put it into their minds, because our words matter so much and what we say to them matters so much.
Absolutely.
This episode has been so great. I think for our last, you're absolutely brilliant, Megan. I just love hearing your answers to all these things. I think we've spoke to it before, but half of the reason this podcast started was because I was constantly taking notes on everything you were telling me. And I thought and I was sharing it out with my community. But for our last question, we had this submitted twice, and I think it's a question that I'm always interested in as well. And the person asks, I'm curious, what is the number one book she would recommend on any topic? Basically, her favorite book she's ever read.
Oh, well, okay. So
You've read a lot of books, right?
I'm having a hard time. I read a lot of research all the time, so I don't read a ton of like books from chapter 1 to the end of the chapter. I feel like I should recommend like a child psychology book, but the one that's coming to my mind is there's two really good self-help books that I think are fantastic, and one is Feeling Good, and it's like self-help CBT for depression. It's just spot on. It is such a good book, and the other is for anxiety, and it's called F*** Anxiety.
Oh, okay.
And it's also, those two are really, really good books that I would recommend to anybody who may be dealing with, honestly, any of this stuff, because it explains the process for cognitive behavior therapy. It explains cognitive distortions we have. So like, again, going back to this idea of like, before we were talking about the person who feels like they're about to get irritated with their kids and then expresses that. And again, how do you work backwards? Like, how do you figure out what cognitions came first, then what emotion came next, then the behavior? These books are really good at explaining to you how to break that down and separate it out into more digestible components that you can actually intervene upon, or have a therapist help you intervene with. But those two books are probably the best books. My best favorite book that I love to read is crazy, but it's called The Mask of Sanity. And it's all about the Hervey Cleckley is like the guy who started the field of psychopathy and the study of psychopathy, and he back in the 1950s wrote this book. He was a a psychiatrist, and he had a broad array of clients that he saw all the way from prisons to in industry to out in the real world. They're all each chapter is a new case conceptualization of a new person that he saw. Ooh. And the psychopathy traits that he noticed in that person. And in some instances, like how they ended up. So,
ooh, I want to read that. That sounds fascinating.
Read.
If you're someone who loves to watch Dateline, you might love that book.
Yeah. You might love this book. It's really interesting. It's just like from like a intrinsically interesting for me. Just I love studying personality and psychopathy and things like that. So it's a fun read. The first couple of books or first chapters are setting the book up. Those are sort of hard to get through, but once he gets into the actual descriptions of the people, which is like chapter 3 and on, those are just like fascinating to read. So actually, Eric and I are reading that together again right now.
Oh, that's so fun.
Yeah, it's a fun book.
All right.
I mean, it's not fun. It's like it's terrifying, but also interesting the way he conceptualizes it.
It's an interesting
very
book.
Old. It's interesting. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think so. We've got a couple good recommendations there. Megan, this has been so awesome. You are brilliant. This is so informative. Thank you to all of our listeners and community, our friends and family that submitted questions. We're definitely going to repeat this this type of episode, this Q&A. So if we didn't get to your question or this episode brings a question to mind, hit us up in our DMs and let us know what your question is, and we'll add it to our list for next time.
Yeah, and let's highlight, we're going to do this for beauty also, and
we are.
Sarah is going to be the expert. So if anybody has any questions about beauty that they need answered, please do submit them, because we are working on compiling that list of questions right now for a future episode.
Ooh, I'm excited for that.
Ooh, yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Don't forget to join us on Instagram, and then please rate, like, and subscribe. We're at Platinum Perspective Podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Great. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
You. Bye.